Dana White is basically okay with his fighters fighting, potentially contracting the coronavirus, being sick and ill, and potentially resulting in death.
Welcome, everybody, to the Cover 2 podcast. My name is Nenad.
And I'm Jared Smith.
And this is a special edition of the Cover 2 podcast live, well, not live, but on Skype for obvious reasons. We're just going to stay as safe as possible and record from remote locations here.
Yeah, I don't really trust Nick right now. That's the main issue. I don't know where he's been. I don't know who he's touched, who he's been around. And so for my own safety, I am continuing to stay at home. Nick actually wanted to do this in person, and I had to say, no, Nick, we're not. We are going to be adults, and we're going to stay quarantined in our homes. And thank you to Skype and technology for allowing us to still do this show just remotely. So hopefully it won't be too much longer before we are back together and we can go on Facebook Live and all that cool stuff. But for now, you are stuck looking at two different screens. But we're still giving you the same content, same material, and we got a lot of news coming at you today.
Yeah, no, we actually do have a pretty newsworthy day. We are going to be talking about NFL free agency and kind of recap what's gone on. There's not going to be too many more signings. There are still some free agents out there, but we'll kind of just have that trickle into our later podcast. Jadeveon Clowney is still a free agent, and there are other high-profile players that are still free agents. But we're going to go over, most of the teams have made their final decisions on roster spots, so we're going to go over that whole thing. We'll also talk about the fact that Dana White and the UFC are still trying to get UFC 249 to go down on the April 18th date that was originally scheduled. That is Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson. Some people saying the biggest fight in UFC history. We'll discuss what we think about that decision of them going on with that event in April. But we want to start the podcast by going over a huge decision that was made this morning and late last night, is that the 2020 Summer Olympics that were set to happen in Tokyo, Japan, have now been postponed to 2021, most likely in the summer. Jared, we kind of thought this would happen, but what are your thoughts that it has now officially been announced that we will have no Olympics until next year?
You know, this was kind of like the last glimmer of hope as far as sporting events goes, and how the impact of the coronavirus has literally put every sporting event around the world to a complete halt, right? And the Olympics was still in that slim window, some slim glimmer of hope that we would be able to see some type of athletic event going on. But for obvious reasons, for the major health concerns and the fact that you're having, people come from all over the world and who knows where they've been, you can't take that risk. And so it's understandable why the Olympics have been postponed. It's just, to me, it's like, it's sad. And it's just like, oh, that last glimmer of hope to have some type of sporting event that we can look forward to. Because as of right now, when you look at the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL, and even the NFL that doesn't start until the fall, everything right now is up in the air. There's a lot of gray area. There are no specific dates or timetables as to when anything is going to resume play. And also, when you think about it, the Olympics have never been canceled or rescheduled for anything other than war. Right. Mm-hmm. The last Olympics that was rescheduled was in 1944. So when you compare that to what's going on right now, and the fact that it's like, wow, that this is obviously very huge. I think from a monetary standpoint, they say that this is going to be in the billions of dollars that Tokyo is going to lose, right, after all of the money that they have spent to get themselves and their city ready for the Olympics. So from a money standpoint, for Tokyo, for the athletes, for the broadcasters who are going to broadcast these events, it is a major blow for everyone in every single way. And like I said, it's sad to see, but something that was almost inevitable And, unfortunately now all we can do is sit and wait and hope that by 2021, we will get the Olympics to be played.
Yes, and the official statement was that, and this is a quote from the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, they said is being moved, the 2020 Summer Olympics are being moved to a date beyond 2020, but not later than summer 2021. What I would expect them to do is to not have it in the winter, because that will just kind of confuse anybody in the future that looks back on it. I would expect it just to happen next summer. One of the cool things about the Olympics, and I think one of the reasons it's remained in the summer, is because of the fact that the only thing going on is the middle of the Major League Baseball season. So people are kind of craving other sports, and it is nice to have those summer sports, those kind of odd sports that we don't always watch, like swimming and like track and field that we get into every 4 years. So I would expect it happens in the summer. I don't think they'd want to compete with the NBA or NHL playoffs or NFL season. I don't think they would. I don't think that'd be a very smart idea for them to do. So I think they'll move it to next year. They said they are still going to call it the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. That doesn't matter.
As they should.
Yeah, they should. Here's my thought on it. With like you're saying, Jared, we don't know anything that's really going to happen this summer. I think this whole entire summer is up in the air for really everybody doing anything. Whether we're going to be still quarantined in the summer, whether people are still going to be having their jobs in the summer. So, of course, sports in that case are going to be also affected deeply by this. And when you look at it from a sports angle, we're probably more than likely not going to need the Olympics in the summer. We're going to have the NBA playoffs. We're going to have potentially the Stanley Cup playoffs. We're going to have the beginning of the baseball season. I'm saying hypothetically if it does happen. And then, of course, we'll be going into the NFL season and preseason and training camp. So in some ways, I don't mind the Olympics being moved because we're already going to have an abundance of crazy sports going on if there are actually sports in the summer. Obviously, no promises, nothing official there yet. But I think that's probably maybe what the IOC also looked into, besides the fact that, like you made a very good point, Jared. When you look at the NBA, NHL, MLB, and NFL, it's not fans necessarily from all around the world going to the sports. It's mainly from their respective cities, people in the United States. But the Olympics is literally people from all over the world. So it's the most dangerous event you possibly could put on in this pandemic going on. So I completely agree with the IOC's decision to move this Olympics. I hope it doesn't affect any Olympians that have trained their whole life for this, and that something happens to them or they get injured in the next year to where they're not going to be able to compete. That will happen, unfortunately, more than likely, but I just hope it's at a minimum, much like a lot of these other sports. I hope that things aren't being affected too much. But the Olympics specifically, there's a lot of sports there that really it's their whole life to try to win a gold medal or a silver medal or a bronze medal. And some of these athletes, unfortunately, might be severely affected by this.
No doubt. Yeah. There's no might. You think about it. This isn't, in most sports, in most leagues, you have an off season, which can go anywhere from, 3 months to like 5 months, depending on the sport. With the Olympics, it's every 4 years, right? So these athletes have been training for the last 4 years, right? That is a obviously very long time. The patience that it takes to keep yourself in shape and keep yourself mentally locked in, right? And then to all of a sudden have that be stripped away and to say, we're adding an extra year. And obviously it's out of everyone's control. But there was one athlete, and I won't mention this person's name, that said, the first they were posed the question, what's the first thing you're going to do now that the Olympics are not going to be held and you're going to have an extra year to prepare? And they said, I'm ordering a pizza. Right? Because it's just like, they've been training, and especially leading up in this past year, I'm sure they've been on a very strict diet, preparing like no other. And now it's like, well, I have an extra year. I'm going to take a little bit of time off and kind of take a break, because I'm sure just from a mental standpoint, not even a physical standpoint, it's taken a toll on a lot of people. And then to have this happen is just kind of a huge blow. But I did want to pose a question to you,
Yep.
And it not only has to do with the Olympics, but it has to do with sports in general. And I've heard this question on multiple different platforms, and specifically on ESPN's Get Up, which airs, early in the mornings. And the question was, with sports playing such a big role in today's society, doesn't matter what the sport is, do leagues like the NBA, like Major League Baseball, like the NHL, and the Olympics as a whole, does sports is it almost like required of them to try to get back to playing as soon as possible? Is it like an obligation that they have to get back to playing to kind of give citizens and people glimpses of hope? Like, is it their duty to come back and play, whether there are fans or no fans? I thought it was an interesting question because obviously, if there's still a threat of this coronavirus being spread, you don't want players or athletes, in bad situations. But when they said, is it their obligation to get back on the court or get back on the field as quickly as possible? I thought it was an interesting question. I just want to get your thoughts on that.
It is a very interesting question. It's kind of a hard one to answer. What I would say is it's not necessarily their obligations. It's really nobody's obligation to do anything to entertain people, at least in my opinion. I think people in the United States specifically, we're kind of used to being entertained and we expect it, which is why a lot of us are being affected, including me and you, by the fact that there's no sports and we're having to watch these reruns of great games, but we know the results of 90% of them, so it's not that great.
ESPN the Ocho. I don't know if you saw that on Sunday. That was pretty interesting.
It was pretty, I did not see it. Is that the kind of misfit toys of sports necessarily?
Yes, misfit of a lot of things. We'll get to that a little bit later. I just had to throw that in there.
Gotcha.
There are, technically what are called sports still going on. Whether you want to talk about folding pizza boxes,
There you go.
the fastest to fold a pizza box or the most pizza boxes in 30 seconds. So that's technically a sport in today's world, Nick.
Yeah. Well, hey. I mean, the video gaming apparently is a sport nowadays too. So anything.
It takes a lot of hand strength. You got to have good hand-eye coordination. I mean, it's video games is a sport.
This is why when I wanted to do my homework when I was younger, I wanted to play video games instead. My parents should have let me because I should have gone in a career of esports. Because look, I wouldn't be affected by the coronavirus.
Could have been the next ninja.
Yeah, I would. Yes, right there. Shout out to Ninja. I never thought that guy's name would come up on this podcast. No, but so getting back to your question, I do think I think when you look at something like some of these athletes' contracts, I do think there is some obligation there with how much money they're being paid to perform to the best of their abilities. Every single time they go out on the court, you know what I'm saying? We're seeing guys getting paid $30-40 million a year. Most Americans, most people in the world don't make that kind of money. So there is, I'm never going to say that athletes 100% need to be on the court if it's dangerous for them to be on the court. But I do believe that if there is no threat of this, or there is a minimal threat of this coronavirus come the summer, I do believe sports need to be pretty vigilant in trying to get back as soon as possible and not canceling seasons and stuff like that. I do believe that most fans will not mind if seasons continue whenever they do. I think people will be craving sports regardless. I do think the NBA and NHL specifically need to try to continue their seasons because, there's a lot of season ticket holders. There's a lot of merchandise that pay these players paychecks. I know TV deals in general kind of pay the overall statement of most teams and all that stuff. But, if it weren't for fans, there wouldn't be sports. And sports wouldn't matter and people really wouldn't care. Sure. So there is a minor obligation for them to get going as soon as possible when it's safe. As long as it's not safe, I could personally care less if they start because we don't need to be having players get sick. I heard the other day that Rudy Gobert is having trouble, tasting food and smelling stuff right now. So it's
Oh,
not,
wow.
yeah, it's not good. And it's, although, we maybe could blame some of these guys for their actions and all that stuff. I do think that it's paramount right now that we everybody listens to the CDC's guidelines, and everyone listens to their local governments and stuff like that, and what they're telling us to do to the best of their ability. And I think as long as we do that, we will be up and running with sports in no time, hopefully the summer. But yeah, to answer your question, I can never say someone's obligated to do something if it's not safe. I can't personally do that.
I like the optimism. I like it on the show. We need a little bit more of that around the world, not just in sports, and everything. Something to kind of look forward to, a little shining of the light.
Yes.
To say so. I like that answer. And like I said, I thought it was very interesting to pose an answer in that way, because obviously I agree 100%. If it's not safe for athletes to get back to their respective sports, then everything else is off the table. Doesn't matter how much money is there to be made or anything like that. But the fact that the question was posed as an obligation for these athletes to get back was interesting. So definitely, like we said, the Tokyo Olympics will be postponed. The very latest summer of 2021, hopefully sooner than that. But for as of right now, this news, like Nick just said, came down this early this morning, if not late last night for some of you. And the breaking news that the 2020 Olympics has been postponed. Just still, like I said, shocking. And the fact that the last time the Olympics was postponed was due to a war, right? And now we can say another Olympics has been postponed due to the coronavirus.
Yeah, no, it's crazy. I mean, each day gets a little bit crazier and crazier, and I'm hoping that kind of stops soon, just in overall life, is that we do get some good news sooner than later on just the overall, effect this crisis is having here on the United States and around the world. Because as much as we're talking about it here in the United States, it's affecting most countries. Especially in Europe and Asia and here in the Americas, it is affecting everybody. It's not just a U.S. thing. So it is really crazy. And another reason why the Olympics can't go on. Speaking of things going on. So, Jared, we don't talk about mixed martial arts or the UFC very often on the show. We'll maybe talk about it if there's a huge fight, maybe a Conor McGregor is involved or somebody like that, right? But so what we're hearing lately here in the MMA world is that Dana White is furiously trying to still put on UFC 249, which is a pay-per-view that they put on April 18th. That's about 3 weeks from now, a little over 3 weeks on a Saturday. And it's a huge fight. It's Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Tony Ferguson for the lightweight championship. There's a lot of people that may not know who those guys are. Khabib's the guy that jumped over the fence after the McGregor fight and beat up people in the stands. To just give a sense of who he is. And Tony Ferguson is one of the best. Just a clear
picture right there.
Yeah, Tony Ferguson is the pound for pound number 8 fighter in the world for mixed martial arts. So it's going to be a great fight. But Jared, what are your thoughts on Dana White trying to put this event on when the CDC is saying that we shouldn't have 50 people or more? Some governments are saying we shouldn't have 10 people or more. What's your thoughts? Two-part question. What are your thoughts on this happening? And based on kind of your response, are you excited that we might get this fight come 3 weeks from now?
As a fan of sports in general, yes. And we just talked about it with the Olympics. It was something to look forward to, and now that's taken away. And if there were to be a UFC fight, of course, you're going to be excited about it. But what the hell is Dana White thinking? I mean, literally everything, and now the Olympics, right? The biggest sport around the world that only happens once every 4 years. When that gets canceled, Dana White thinks that him along with others can put on a UFC fight, regardless of if there's no fans in the stands. I don't understand why he is so adamant on making this fight happen, saying that is 99.9% there.
Yeah.
Right. And they're just working out the finer details. So I'm very curious, like, is he just that money driven that he doesn't care about the safety of his athletes and his performers? Because without his athletes, Dana White, who is he? Right? So, Dana White's not getting in the ring and fighting. And so I don't know, not the word disappointed, but I think like disgusted that with everything going on in the world and the fact that almost everything is shut down other than your local grocery stores and gas stations and, restaurants that are serving to-go food, the fact that Dana White is trying to hold a UFC event right now is like pretty startling to me. And I understand he's the owner and he makes the rules, but I would be shocked if this fight does take place in the next month or month and a half. And if it does take place, I don't know. I don't even know if I'll watch it. I mean, because it's like the safety of these athletes. And I don't think that Dana White I don't think that's what's on his mind. I think money is on his mind. And that's obviously a bad place to be.
Well, and you mentioned the 99.9% chance this happens is because he said 99.9% he has a location set. So, I mean,
great. So have that location in November.
That's
or December.
True. Well, yeah, and I think what's happened with this and with a lot of other cards, I don't know if I was saying this before the podcast or if I was saying this at the very beginning. I'll repeat it again just in case. I believe Dana White is looking at this as he's going to have trouble fulfilling his kind of obligations to give every fighter 3 fights if they are healthy. It's something along the lines of that. He also has stated that under the UFC's, this is a very complicated thing, and I don't want to say anything wrong here, but apparently the UFC is under a different health guideline because of the fact that people are essentially going to be getting knocked out cold, and there is blood that's spurted all over the place. So there's a different health guideline, and that for some reason he believes that the UFC's guidelines on health are just overall different in this whole pandemic as well. That's what I heard too. So, it is strange that this event is still going on, but it has not been canceled. And the UFC canceled events, they postponed events. They didn't even cancel these events either. They postponed events for cards on March 21st, which it would have just happened, March 28th, and April 11th, set to take place in London, Columbus, and Portland, Oregon. So he already postponed fights, considering that this is a pay-per-view and that there is extra money to be made. I think you have a point there that because there is major money to be made, maybe there's more, there's more oomph to get this thing going. Apparently, it's a full card. It's 10 fights or 12 fights, whatever a main card would be. And so, I personally will watch it because I'm a big fan of MMA, and I did actually enjoy their card that they ran right before the very stringent restrictions came down from the U.S. government. They ran a card in Brazil that featured no crowd, and it was still a pretty good card. And the fighters fought normally, and you could hear kind of the coaches and all them talking and stuff like that. But once they announced that they should have 10 or more people in one location, that was impossible for an event to go on. My only thought is maybe Dana White has heard what the president and the government has said, is that in 15, 19 days, they're going to roll back some of these restrictions. That would fit the April 18th date. So technically, and Dana White is very good friends with the president of the United States, so maybe he has inside information we don't know. But it's going to be very crazy if that event goes on. And I would expect an announcement at some point while this podcast has been released, where this event is going to be, and I'm sure we'll talk about it again on the next podcast, but we just want to give our opinion real quick. Jared, do you have something else to say?
So in everything that you said, I understood that. Basically, what Dana White is saying is that he is okay with his fighters fighting, right? Pay-per-view, no fans, generating revenue from that, and trying to fulfill the agreements of the 3 fights per fighter, right?
Yeah.
Right. Guess what? Every other sport and every other player that has a contract is going through the same type of thing. Now, maybe they're not trying to fulfill 3 fights, but for the National Basketball Association, every basketball player right now isn't sure if they're going to get a paycheck through April. Now, a lot of those players are millionaires, and they are not in the same boat as your average everyday citizen, right?
Yeah.
They're more than likely going to be okay, but they're not getting paid, right? And my last point, we do need to move on. Dana White is basically okay with his fighters fighting, potentially contracting the coronavirus, being sick and ill, and potentially resulting in death. Right? That like, I'm not trying to I don't know, like, sound mean or anything, but that's obviously, with the number of deaths in the thousands that we have had from this coronavirus, Dana White is basically saying that he's willing to take that risk of letting his fighters go out there in a unhealthy environment, risk getting this coronavirus, and risk potential death, all for a fight, all to generate money. And like I said, without fans. To me, when you pose it like that, with that type of seriousness, I think you have to take a step back and say, you know what, maybe this isn't the best thing for us. What we don't know is, you're right, if Dana White is close with President Trump, maybe he is getting information that the rest of us are not. But I just have a very hard time with seeing how this is anything other than a money grab, right? You cannot say that you are protecting your athletes, your players, and you have the best interest in them when you are trying to plan a fight when the world is going through something so unprecedented that there is no guideline, no rule book for this. So I just have a hard time seeing this go through.
Yeah, you make very good points. It's hard to argue against your point. And if for some reason Dana White has information that maybe we all don't, we'll see what goes on. I do believe, though, he's going to not force any of these fighters to fight. I know Khabib and Tony Ferguson do want to fight under any circumstances, the main event fighters. So I guess when you look at that, it's at least a tag team effort there from Dana and the main event fighters to make this fight go on. The fighters no fighters really have stated from this card that they don't want to fight yet. So we'll see about that. We do have a little bit over 3 weeks to go before this event would, quote unquote, happen. But yeah, it'll be very interesting. And I definitely wanted to bring it up on this podcast because I knew that with the lack of sports going on, something potentially happening in April would be pretty crazy. So the only thing I want going on in April is the draft, if it's not safe. That's the only thing I want to go.
Which will happen, but actually will not take place in Vegas anymore. So that's kind of very shocking as well. It's going to be basically done just only on television, and it's going to be
it's going to be done like this.
Basically, yeah. So very different, but at least that will go on. So something to look forward to.
Yes. Well, speaking of football, we need to get into our final segment of the day, and that is our winners and losers of free agency in the NFL so far to this date. We're about a week from when free agency started last week. Crazy things have gone on. We talked about DeAndre Hopkins getting traded to the Cardinals last week. We talked about Tom Brady going to the Buccaneers last week.
At that.
It is. And Tom Brady just got introduced this morning as well. There's been more news about the Texans that's come out, but we're not going to really dive into those stories anymore. We're going to get kind of some other teams in the NFL and really our biggest winners and losers, because there are some clear teams that have done well and there are some clear teams that have not done well. Before we get into our kind of back and forth here, we did want to acknowledge that both the Buccaneers and the Texans, like we mentioned last week, the Texans are losers in this whole thing, and the Buccaneers are winners. It's pretty clear, and I think most fans of the NFL can figure that out, so we're not going to go over that. Anytime you can add the best quarterback of all time to your team, we're not going to call you a loser. It's much like when Peyton Manning joined the Denver Broncos. It was going to work out pretty well. And then they ended up winning a Super Bowl with him in the end.
They had a great defense. I mean, I don't know if they win without that defense.
True.
But
True.
Peyton
That's
Manning
true.
is still
And
Peyton.
Peyton Manning was throwing the ball like it was a frisbee. Some of those times, some bad balls come from Peyton Manning in those years. But that's not important. And then we're going on to the Texans. Like we mentioned last week, the Texans put on potentially one of the worst trades in NFL history with my Arizona Cardinals and gave us DeAndre Hopkins for essentially nothing. And so you're a loser when you do that. When you take away your best player on your team and get back essentially nothing and not much trade capital. When we've looked at it and even going back further, they didn't get anything for Jadeveon Clowney either when they gave up him. So the Texans overall, specifically Bill Bryan as general manager, they are losers. So we're not going to dive into that, and we're not going to explain why we think Texans are losers and the Buccaneers are winners. So Jared, I want to give you your first winner of free agency. We talked about two teams that we wanted to mention, so just pick one and go about it and kind of explain to the viewers why you think that team was a winner.
Like my own team or one of the teams that you had just.
No. We discussed them. We discussed two teams before the podcast. It was the Miami Dolphins and the Arizona Cardinals.
I just wanted to make sure we're on the same page. Okay.
Yes. Okay. Yeah.
I am gonna take the Dolphins. The Dolphins, and like Nick had mentioned to me off air, the first official day of free agency, the Miami Dolphins spent $131 million just in guarantees. That is the most money dished out in guarantees on the first day of free agency and NFL history. So obviously the Dolphins are not looking to tank anymore, right? Everyone was saying for the last 2 years, tank for Tua. And towards the end of the year, the Dolphins actually played a lot better, right? They weren't getting blown out like they did the first game of the season against the Baltimore Ravens. And they actually showed a team that can come together and win. Now you add Byron Jones, you add Jordan Howard, you add some offensive line pieces. I mean, the fact that this team has draft capital, with 5 picks in the first 2 rounds, right? So whether they want to stay with those 5 picks, whether they want to move up, whether they want to, trade down. I mean, there's a plethora of things that this Dolphins organization can do. They have so much flexibility that it's tough. And I can't help but say it. The fact that Tom Brady is not in New England anymore, that automatically elevates the other 3 teams in the AFC East, the Buffalo Bills, the Miami Dolphins, and the New York Jets, even though I still think the Jets are a bad team. Without Tom Brady there, like without the juggernaut, it brings the Patriots down to like a human level, right? They're not untouchable anymore. And I think Miami, if they have a good draft, say they draft Tua, get some more help on the offensive line, I think this team can potentially compete for a division title, which I don't think we've said about the Miami Dolphins in over a decade. So if you're a Miami Dolphins fan, I think you have to be very excited, not only about this season, but about where this team is headed in the future. I think Brian Flores has done a great job so far with this organization, coming from that Bill Belichick tree and kind of, trusting the process in a sense, right? They might not be flashy. They might not always have the highlight plays, but they just run a very tight-knit group. And so the Miami Dolphins are definitely my team that was the most improved, not just because of the money that they spent, but the actual quality of players that they were able to bring in. And like I said, the amount of draft picks that they have for this year.
Yeah, it is amazing. 14 overall draft picks for the Miami Dolphins, including 3 first-round picks, which is just it's ridiculous. And when you talked about their additions to subtractions, it's 100% plus. They didn't lose anybody. It's actually crazy. And nobody of name value, right? There are obviously going to be some guys that you don't keep overall on a roster, but most guys, most guys that are contributors to your team, they have not lost anybody. And I'll just list everybody they've signed so far according to Yahoo Sports. Cornerback Byron Jones, formerly the Cowboys. Kyle Van Noy,
cornerback in the league.
Yep. Kyle Van Noy, former linebacker of the New England Patriots. Shaq Lawson, defensive lineman from the Bills. Eric Flowers, a guard from the New York Giants. Emmanuel Ogbah, I believe he's a defensive end from formerly the Cleveland Browns. Jordan Howard, and linebacker Camus Grugier-Hill, who I believe was formerly a member of the Philadelphia Eagles. So all big signings there. And then, of course, they'll have 3 first-round picks added to a team that was already 5-11 and a team that's division got a lot worse, just simply because Tom Brady left the New England Patriots. So, yeah, Dolphins, I do not disagree. They're one of the best free agent teams. And that's, you know what? I do like when the teams that have money spend money too, because you could look at the Miami Dolphins as maybe a team that would continue tanking and would continue kind of rebuilding their team. But they didn't. And like you said, I mean, last year they even beat the Patriots at home. Or they beat the Patriots on the road. They beat the Patriots in Gillette Stadium. I believe it was the last week of the season. It really affected the New England Patriots playoff run going in, and in some ways was one of the contributing factors of the Patriots getting eliminated earlier than they probably wanted to. So, the Dolphins, they finished the season hot, like you mentioned, and they have not done anything but add, and they have not lost anything yet. So
I have to disagree with you a little bit on the fact that, there's, first of all, the NFL has in one of its clauses for organizations that you have to spend X amount of dollars, right? So a team cannot just keep $50 million of salary cap and not spend it and save it all for next year. You have to spend
I did not know that.
You have to spend a percentage of that cap. Now, obviously, you don't have to spend all of it, right? You can save a chunk of it or a portion of it, but you do have to spend some of it. So, my main point that I disagree with you here is if you look at the Cleveland Browns in the last 10 years, they are notorious for not only having, bad records, being mediocre, and having high draft picks, but they spend money in free agency every single year. So my thing is, it's not about spending money in free agency because any team can go out and throw money at a player. It's about finding a player that fits your system. And if you have to spend a lot of money in doing so, then it's worth it, right? And they say that the best way to build a team, at least as far as the NFL goes, is through the drafts. When you have to reach out and spend more money in free agency, that's less money that you can use to make up the rest of your team. When you draft a player, there is a cap on how much you have to pay that player for his rookie contract. Therefore, more money that you can save for your organization, right? So, and looking at the Cleveland Browns, when they just go out and throw $50 million here and $70 million here and $30 million here at guys that maybe don't necessarily fit their system, but on paper it looks good, that's why you have such a high rate of head coaching turnover that the Cleveland Browns do, and the low rate of success that they do. So I think the Dolphins have done a great job, not just because they spent money, but because they used it on pieces that actually fit their system. Kyle Van Noy, former New England Patriot, like you mentioned, played under Brian Flores in that defensive system. So he can immediately come over. He already knows the system. And here's a very important part that I don't think we've discussed yet on this show. The fact that with the coronavirus going on, the NFL has implemented rules to where teams cannot meet face-to-face with players. Players cannot come in to work out, take physicals, basically do anything. Everything has to be over the phone, like Skype, just like you and I are doing right now. So to bring in a player like Kyle Van Noy, who was a defensive captain in New England and knows the system, he can not only already knows the plays and knows the terminology and the verbiage, he can get his teammates up to speed. So he's like another coach on the field. It's almost like I'm trying to think of another example. When the Carolina Panthers just signed PJ Walker from the XFL, right? You want to know why the Panthers signed PJ Walker? Not only because he excelled in the XFL, but because head coach Matt Rule coached PJ Walker at the University of Temple when PJ Walker was.
And they just they just signed Robbie Anderson, who also played under Matt Rule at Temple. So
exactly right. Yeah. So you're bringing guys in that are familiar with the terminology, and like I said, because of the unprecedented ways, and the lack of training that these players are going to be able to get. You want to bring in guys that are already familiar with their system, that are already up to speed, and so it makes sense. So, like I said, to wrap this up, I disagree with you a little bit. I think the Dolphins spent their money wisely as opposed to just throwing money out the window just to try to bring guys in like the Cleveland Browns have done.
Yeah, no. Being compared to the Cleveland Browns is never a good thing. So I did not mean to disrespect the Miami Dolphins in any way by comparing them even remotely, even by accident, to the Cleveland Browns. Okay, so moving on to our second team that we wanted to discuss. I do, Jared, want to get your take on this because I'm a fan of this team. It's clear that I like following this team, and I'm going to be optimistic about most signings in the offseason of a team. But I can't help but notice that anytime I look at anything on the internet about who the Cardinals are signing and the winners and losers of free agency, the Cardinals are always up at the top. So I have to agree with the masses here. And I do believe one of the winners of free agency are my Arizona Cardinals. When you look at it, at what's happened, the only losses the Cardinals have had are defensive end Rodney Gunter, who is a very solid player for them. I forget which team he went to off the top of my head, but it doesn't matter as much. He's left the team. And of course, running back David Johnson was traded for a guy named DeAndre Hopkins, who we'll talk about in a second. But looking at who the Cardinals kept on their roster, they transition tag Kenyon Drake, a running back that was really, really good for them, had a couple 200-yard games for the Cardinals last year. I believe he had a 4-touchdown game for the Cardinals last year as well. He signed to a 1-year, $8 million tag deal. And so he's officially on the team now. Larry Fitzgerald announced he's going to come back. He said that he had one of the most fun years he's had in a while with this team last year. And then, of course, via free agency, the Cardinals add defensive tackle formerly of the Buffalo Bills, Jordan Phillips. That fixes a hole in the Cardinals defense. Outside linebacker Devon Kennard, former USC Trojan, a defensive captain on the Detroit Lions. And then linebacker Devondre Campbell, a starting linebacker for the Atlanta Falcons, going all the way back to their Super Bowl days. So the Cardinals have done a lot. They've also re-signed their kicker, Zane Gonzalez, who was one of the best kickers in the NFL last year, very unsung. And a lot of people don't know that, but he barely missed a kick last year. And many other key special teams players. So, Jared, I want to get your take, but an offense, just to give one more stat real quickly, an offense that was number 1 in the NFL for yards per rush. That's over 5 yards per rush. Brought back everybody that was a contributor to that, while also improving overall on offense. So, I'm excited. Oh, and then also, by the way, we traded for the best wide receiver in the National Football League in DeAndre Hopkins. Didn't want to forget that part. But yeah, so Jared, give me your take on the Arizona Cardinals offseason.
I mean, I think you said it all. We might as well just plug the Cardinals into the Super Bowl, right? I don't know. Like, what, they don't have any holes. I mean, like, why even draft, right? Their team is slotted to go all the way.
Not to mention they have the number 8 pick in the NFL draft as well this year too.
Why even draft? I mean, they're good to go. Just put them on the field, right? They're fine. They're fine. No, okay. In all seriousness, yes. Yeah. When you trade for one of the top 3 receivers in all the NFL in DeAndre Hopkins and give up basically peanuts for him, no disrespect to David Johnson, but his $12 million contract was not worth his play on the field anymore. And the fact that the Texans were willing to trade for that and take on that entire salary is simply unbelievable. So, good for the Cardinals for being able to put that trade together. That is obviously a huge upgrade. You pair him with Larry Fitzgerald, and the fact that Larry Fitzgerald can not only still play, but what Larry Fitzgerald can teach DeAndre Hopkins, show him, kind of some new tricks, nuances. And I think that's going to be kind of a great pairing there. And then the Cardinals also have, I would say, some good complementary pieces at the receiver position, slot receivers, some guys that can kind of run down the field, stretch the defense a little bit. And then you mentioned Kenyon Drake, who came out of Alabama and was a high draft pick, didn't necessarily excel with the Dolphins, comes to the Cardinals and a spread offense and absolutely explodes, right? You mentioned 2 200-yard games, 1 game of 4 rushing touchdowns. Well-deserved $8 million contract for him. So this Cardinals team looks good on paper, right? They do need some help at the offensive line spot. Luckily, with that number 8 pick, you would assume that they would at least fill one of those spots with a new offensive lineman. I think the biggest, I don't want to say issue, but the biggest thing that would hold the Cardinals back this year, barring injury, is the fact that they are in one of the toughest divisions in the NFL.
Yep.
You have the Seattle Seahawks with Russell Wilson. Now, they may not have as much of a complete team as the Cardinals, but Russell Wilson has shown that by himself, he can lift up players and make them better. He's like Tom Brady, Aaron Rodgers. He makes guys around him better. So as long as Russell Wilson is in Seattle, Seattle will be a contender. You've got the LA Rams. Now, they have fallen off a little bit, right? You lose Todd Gurley, just a complete shocker because you don't want to pay him $10 million a year. You lose your defensive coordinator in Wade Phillips. You use your special teams coordinator, who is known for doing exotic things and always tricking, the other special teams units. So I think it'll be a very interesting year for head coach Sean McVay to really kind of put his stamp on this team. And we'll see how good of a coach he is with a less talented team than what he inherited. And last but not least, you've got the Super Bowl NFC champion in San Francisco 49ers. Not Super Bowl champion, NFC champion 49ers, who don't have many holes on their team other than they let DeForest Buckner go to the Indianapolis Colts because they didn't want to pay him $20 million a year. But you still got Joey Bosa. The defense is nasty. Richard Sherman. If the offense can add a few pieces as far as weapons for Jimmy Garoppolo to throw to, then I think they could be right back in the Super Bowl next year. So that is the biggest thing that I think it would hold up this Cardinals team, is really just the fact that they're in a tough division and they've got to play, 6 games that are going to be very tough and very hard-nosed. So if they can, go 4-2 against their division opponents, I like the Cardinals' chances of making the playoffs and making some noise. And I think it's as of right now, the way this team is constructed, I don't think that's kind of out of reach for this team.
No, yeah. And I'm not saying by any stance the Cardinals are a Super Bowl contender when you look at a lot of other teams.
I just had to clarify that because you were feeling yourself a little bit. And listen, if we were talking about my Cowboys right now, you can hype yourself up, right? If you're like, we got DeAndre Hopkins, you pair him with Larry Fitzgerald, we're bringing back a running back who excelled, not even being with the team for a full year. You add pieces on defense. You get Patrick Peterson back for a full year. Let's all not forget he missed the first 6 seasons of last year after he was suspended, right? So you get him back for a full year.
Yeah.
Listen, there's pieces on this team and there's reasons to be excited. But let's pump the brakes a little bit. We got to remember, second-year quarterback in Kyler Murray, second-year head coach in Cliff Kingsbury. So I think they're still getting their feet wet and still trying to put their own stamps on the NFL.
I'm just going to say that when you mentioned second-year quarterback, the last 2 second-year quarterbacks that have succeeded are Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson. So I don't know if the 2-year quarterback is necessarily a negative for the Arizona Cardinals.
Okay.
One of those players was coached by the Arizona Cardinals coach, Cliff Kingsbury. So moving on, real quickly too, when we're talking about free agency, how they did in the offseason, though, the Cardinals were the 4th worst team in the NFL, and I believe worse in all passing defense. So them adding linebackers and them getting DBs back healthy, aka Patrick Peterson from not being prepared after suspension, it's another addition that I just want to mention that it's one of the reasons their offseason was good. Okay, you mentioned another team, and you actually mentioned one of our teams that we're going to go with the negative, one of the losers of this offseason. I'm going to do this one because I love to talk crap on the Rams. So let me do this one.
Can we? I hope you mentioned this, but if not, we have to talk about this first.
I'm looking at it. I was
going on with their logo.
Oh.
What kind of logo is that? Looks like a news station. Is this like CBS? What kind of logo is that? Like you're breaking in a brand new stadium, and that's what you pull out? Dude, I don't know what this organization is doing. From their personnel, letting Todd Gurley go, and not bringing back coaching staff, and now coming out with this. I mean, how can you be excited? I'm looking at it right now, and I'm just getting depressed. I need to actually remove it from my screen. I think it looks awful.
Jared, Jared, here's the thing. It's not only that it looks bad. I've been looking at it actually the entire time we've been doing our podcast because I have websites up that have the local teams' logos. And unfortunately, they've updated the Rams logo. The problem with the logo that I have is not that the creativeness is fine. It looks like a ram, right? The problem is it also looks like a lightning bolt in the shape of a C. And there is a team that has a lightning bolt logo that starts with a C that plays in the same damn stadium as the Los Angeles Rams and also has Los Angeles at the beginning of their name. So whoever did this must sneakily be a Chargers fan because this looks dumb as hell. This looks really stupid. It's bad.
Yeah,
it's bad.
I mean the Ram logo, I guess I can eventually get on board with, but the actual LA logo, dude, that just looks bad, man. I'm telling you, it looks like CBS LA Channel 2. It looks like the logo. That's literally what it looks like. They made a replica of. They must have a contract agreement, a TV agreement with CBS because that's exactly what it looks like. It looks awful.
I think they do. CBS Radio, no joke.
They must something. But let's get back to the team. I want to get your thoughts. Obviously, it's a division rival to your Arizona Cardinals. And what do you think about some of the moves that they had made? Let's start specifically with Todd Gurley.
Well, I mean, the problem with Todd Gurley is he doesn't play to what he's getting paid for. And that has to do with injuries pretty much exclusively, to be honest. I think his skill is all world. But this degenerative, I'm going to say that word wrong, so I'm not going to say it again, knee issue that he has is ruining his NFL career. So I'm just going to say it blunt like that. And it's one of the reasons that they lost the Super Bowl to the New England Patriots, because I believe if Todd Gurley played in that game, the Rams would have won that game. Having the threat of Todd Gurley, which he was. He ran the ball, 6 times, if I remember correctly, in that game for less than 30 yards. So wasn't a contributor in that game. I just think the Rams were stuck with this. I think when they saw that David Johnson got traded to the Texans, they thought there might be hope. But then they remembered that trade was so bad that was not going to be possible for regular teams to make that decision. So they had to release him. It's much like what the Panthers just did with Cam Newton earlier this morning. If you're just finding that out right now, Cam Newton was released from the Panthers. In some ways, very similar cases. Newton, a beat-up quarterback, wasn't playing to his ability because of injuries and wasn't tradable because his contract was too big. So I think the Rams, they had to release him. I'm not really that mad at them. I think they like Malcolm Brown. I think they like their other running backs on that roster.
They better.
Yeah, well, I know. And here's the problem with the Rams, though. It's not really their offense that's really 100% at fault for them having a bad offseason. I'm trying to get some of these tweets I sent yesterday because I really outlined what this was. Yeah, okay, so looking at the Rams, here are the players they've lost. Dante Fowler Jr., Corey Littleton, Michael Brockers, Todd Gurley, Nickel Roby-Coleman, Clay Matthews, and Eric Weddle. Only one of those was retired. Okay.
And only one of those was on the offensive side of the ball. So that defense just got depleted. Now, Clay Matthews, Eric Weddle, a little long in the tooth, but the experience factor, the veteran leadership, that's a lot to replace on a defense.
No. And so they do re-sign Andrew Whitworth, but it's very uncertain how many years he's going to play. He's this very solid tackle for the NFL. If they wouldn't have signed him back, they'd have one of the worst offensive lines in football. So they had to sign him back, but I mean, he could only play 1 year. And the only additions they've added are Ashawn Robinson, the defensive tackle, I believe, formerly of the Detroit Lions, that's done really nothing in his NFL career spectacular. And Leonard Floyd, an outside linebacker for the Bears, that's solid, but not a Pro Bowler by any.
Well, he was cut by the Bears too. So, the Bears didn't want him. It's not like he was just a free agent. The Bears cut him.
So this has every meaning of the Rams having a bad offseason. And looking at this overall, their only 2 players on defense are Jalen Ramsey and Aaron Donald. That's not enough to make your defense good.
I mean, 2 superstars.
Yes,
Two superstars.
Two superstars, but a very interesting comparison that I can go just based on the team I follow. The Cardinals the past couple of years have only had Patrick Peterson and Chandler Jones, and their defense has been, last 2 years, the worst in the NFL. So two guys cannot make your defense even remotely good. Although I do believe Aaron Donald, Jalen Ramsey, top 5 players in the NFL overall. But, when you look at this team, their offensive line gets worse and worse. Goff has proved that without Todd Gurley, he is not an elite quarterback.
Hey, how do the Rams feel now about giving Goff that huge contract, huh?
I bet they feel really awesome, Jared. I feel they feel really awesome. Woo. No,
we're about to see this year, because this is going to be on Jared Goff, right?
Yeah.
You have to unleash him. You can't sit here and hide behind a running back or hide behind Coach Sean McVay with the calculated play calls. You're paying Jared Goff for a reason, and this year you have to unleash that and see if he can carry the team on his shoulders.
Yeah,
you have to, because if not, going into next year, I think you have to really seriously consider releasing him, or at least reducing his contract, because so far we've seen he does not deserve the contract that he was given. No. That was with Todd Gurley, with the other pieces that they had in place for the last 2 or 3 years. I don't see it, man. I don't see this Rams team making the playoffs at all. Not the way that they are currently constructed.
Yeah, no. It's not. So, and then so I agree completely with you about Jared Goff.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No. Now they are they strapped with money with the contracts of Jared Goff and Aaron Donald.
And they still have to pay Jalen Ramsey.
Yeah, they have no draft picks either. So this team, we're not talking about draft picks necessarily because it wasn't part of their free agency, but I mean, for them to lose this many players and essentially to add a couple average guys in this division, like you just mentioned with the Cardinals have gotten so much better. The Seahawks still have Russell Wilson. They stayed about the same. And the San Francisco 49ers actually could get better through the draft. So, I mean, the Rams are looking at it like they might lose 5 games in the division. I'm not even kidding.
I just thought of this too, and I mentioned when I was speaking about the 49ers a minute ago how they traded away their all-pro DeForest Buckner. Say that 3 times fast. To the Colts. The 49ers got a first-round pick back for that. So a team that was just in the Super Bowl this past year has the number 13 overall pick. They're going to have they can go offensive line, they can go receiver. There's so many areas that they can go, and it's not like they have many holes to fill. So you're right. I mean, that team is going. They have 2 first-round picks, and they were just in the Super Bowl. That's almost ridiculous. Unheard of, right? That's unheard of. So very scary for them. Listen, you got the Rams moving into. I think when we first heard that the Rams and the Chargers were going to be moving into a new stadium and everything was built, all the talk was on the Rams, right? It was like, oh, this Rams team is overshadowing the Chargers. They have all the superstars. They've got all the playmakers. They've got the young up and coming coach in Sean McVay. That sparkle has dwindled completely, right? Yeah. And you're looking at this Rams team right now, and if I'm a Rams fan, which I am not, I'm not that excited about going into this season. Like what would make me want to be a season ticket holder or spend $500 on seats, because it's going to be expensive to pay for that, multi-billion-dollar stadium.
Yeah,
there's not many things right now getting me excited to want to go and watch this team play live.
It's pretty bad for the Rams. Yeah, it's to give them some credit, they still have Jared Goff is not a bad quarterback. I think he's an average quarterback. You have receivers. You have Brandon Cooks,
Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp.
Their tight end Gerald Everett has been a very solid piece of their offense. Tyler Higbee as well. But like I said, the running back position got worse. The offensive line has gotten worse and worse every year. So those guys are going to be less open. Jared Goff's going to have less time, and there's going to be less holes open for the running backs. So, and then on defense, I can't imagine this defense stopping too many people, to field goals and stuff like that. So the offense is going to be on the field more. This just has every case of looking like the Rams are not only not a playoff team this year, but might be trending in a very, very negative way, kind of like they did in their first season in LA. Not maybe that bad because they had Jeff Fisher as a coach.
That was pretty bad.
Yeah, not to mention all these guys missing, but like you mentioned a lot earlier in this segment, they lost coaches too. Like they don't even have who's their DC, right?
I don't know if they promoted within or if they hired someone from the outside, but and listen, it's not the worst thing in the world that they did not renew Wade Phillips' contract. Yeah. But if you just think about it from a familiarity standpoint, now it's a new defensive scheme that's coming in, new terminology, new all that stuff that these players now have to learn in an off season to where there's so much uncertainty because of the coronavirus. So, like I said, just another thing that obviously every team has to deal with. But the fact that the Rams now have this added pressure of having to learn terminology and get their players up to speed without actually currently being able to physically see their players seems like a daunting task.
It does. And like I mentioned before, they don't have a first round pick. Their first pick is number 50 NFL draft, and they are also missing a 5th round pick in this year's draft as well. So 6
good
picks.
Luck.
Yeah, it's not looking good, and I could not be happier for the on the Rams side. Okay, so to finish off this podcast, we want to give our last loser of the offseason. It's pretty obvious, the New England Patriots. Jared, give me what you think about the Patriots offseason. We all know about Tom Brady, but what else have they lost that makes this a pretty bad offseason for them?
Well, listen, you lose Kyle Van Noy, who I mentioned earlier went to the Dolphins. They lost a couple defensive pieces up front. And it's so tough not to sit here and not talk about Tom Brady, right? Because he was the guy. He made Chris Hogan look really good. Who knows if Julian Edelman is Julian Edelman without Tom Brady, right? And so Bill Belichick is still there, and you still have that same strategy and core values that the team goes by. But at the end of the day, Bill Belichick is not lacing up his cleats to go out and play. So the fact that you have Jared Stidham and Brian Hoyer as the only 2 quarterbacks on the current roster right now is a little scary, right? There's mention, I've seen mock drafts where the Patriots are taking Jordan Love out of Utah State. Who knows if the Patriots move up in the draft, but it's just such a glaring loss for this team that I don't know if they have the pieces to overcome that. Their defense was very good, great last year. You have Stephon Gilmore still there, the best corner in the league. But I don't know how much the rest of those pieces will be able to overcome the loss of Tom Brady. And like we mentioned, the Dolphins got better this offseason. The Buffalo Bills got better. They traded for Stephon Diggs, so they have a legit number 1 receiver to go with Cole Beasley. And Brown, their other 3rd receiver. So, the Patriots drastically fell and got worse while other teams in their division, kind of closed the gap. And we haven't seen it in over a decade, but I think this is the start of, a new regime coming in for this specific division in the AFC East. And who knows? The Patriots, if they make the playoffs, I won't be surprised because Bill Belichick is still there. But if they don't make the playoffs, I'm going to say it's because Tom Brady wasn't there.
Yeah, well, and I think when you have to look at it too, this New England Patriots team is used to going deep. They're used to going to the Super Bowl. So when you have this bad of an offseason being that organization, it actually is kind of worse than most teams. When you look at it on paper, they get Devin McCourty back. They get they franchise tag Joe Thuney, who's one of the better guards in the league.
Right.
They did add a safety, but overall, they lost Tom Brady, which is huge. They lost Van Noy. They lost Jamie Collins, Danny Shelton. They lost their kicker, Steven Gostkowski, who wasn't the best.
Well, they released him. They let him go.
Yeah,
so that was their own choice.
They let him go. My biggest problem with the Patriots here, and we obviously the draft hasn't happened yet, but based on their cap space, a lot of people think they're not going to be able to add a quarterback. And right now, the quarterbacks on their roster are Brian Hoyer, who they signed yesterday, Jarrett Stidham, and Cody Kessler. None of those guys.
I forgot about Cody Kessler.
Yeah.
Cody Kessler could be the guy.
None of those guys remotely do I think could make them a playoff team. We've seen Matt Castle get the Patriots to the playoffs, but those teams were a lot better than this one, and those offenses were a lot better than this one. when you look at it, their offense really was not very good last year for a playoff team, and it got worse without Tom Brady. So, yeah, for the Patriots, one of the worst off seasons since they've had Bill Belichick and Tom Brady, in their system, maybe the worst. But yeah.
So really quick, I want to come back to you with the Patriots because I have 2 questions for you before we end the show.
Yeah.
I just got news that Chargers have come out with their own new logos in a surprise move I don't know if they have this in the works, if they figured out that the Rams were doing this and then the Chargers wanted to do it. But the Chargers, I have not seen it yet. I just literally got the update on my iPhone watch. But the LA Chargers have now come out with their own updated logo. I'm sure they'll have new uniforms as well. So both LA teams are, drastically changing their look. We will see if it translates to more wins on the field, which I do not. But really quickly, I want to go back to the Patriots. 2 questions for you. The first one, Cam Newton was just released by the Panthers this morning, which you already mentioned.
Yes.
Do you see the Patriots taking somewhat of a flyer on Cam Newton if he is healthy? Now, obviously, Tom Brady and Cam Newton have very different styles in the way that they play. Cam Newton can, he's a big body guy. He can run. He's not the most accurate, but he was the NFL MVP in 2015. If healthy, do you see a potential fit there?
For who are you saying? Say the name one more time. Cam Newton. No. I don't think Cam Newton's attitude fits the New England Patriots brand. I don't. It's what I was listening to Colin Cowherd speak today, and he was discussing how really everybody that's connected directly with Cam Newton, like we mentioned, Matt Rule is signing and bringing a lot of people that he's formerly associated with to the Panthers, Robbie Anderson, and others. When you look at Cam Newton, there's a lot of connections. Ron Rivera in Washington, Matt Rule, a culture guy. The GM wasn't a big fan of him. Sean McDermott potentially has a chance to sign him as well, who's connected directly to formerly being an OC with the Panthers. He doesn't want him either. So I don't know why the hell Bill Belichick would want him either, knowing that Cam Newton's past, he can be a little bit selfish. His attitude is not the best. And overall, his play kind of depends on his attitude, which is very un-Patriots-like. So no, I don't see it being a good fit just because I think there'd be a lot of backlash back and forth between him and Belichick and him and Josh McDaniels and people like that. So no, I think the best fit for Cam might be the Chargers because that system probably would run better with a running quarterback, or at least a somewhat mobile quarterback. Phil Rivers was maybe the most immobile quarterback in the NFL last year. And I think if you add a little extra threat at quarterback, they're already committed somewhat to Tyrod Taylor. Cam Newton is better than Tyrod Taylor. So if you can get him at a lower rate than he already was going to be and maybe sign him for 1-2 years, something like that, maybe to get fans of the Chargers a little bit more excited than Tyrod Taylor, I think that would be his best fit right now. Maybe not the LA scene might not be the best for Cam Newton, but overall, I do think that scheme works.
All right. And then second question, Colin Cowherd came out with an interesting point, and I don't know if you've seen it. He thinks that Bill Belichick might have something up his sleeve to where the Patriots are tanking for Trevor Lawrence in next year's NFL draft.
I mean, if they stick with the quarterbacks they have, it's going to be hard to argue that. But if they do draft a young quarterback this year, I think that would decrease it. But yeah, I mean, yeah, I think it depends on what they do in the draft. To be honest, if they don't draft a quarterback, I think Bill Belichick might be like, screw it. Let's just see, because Trevor Lawrence, I think, is better than any of the quarterbacks that have come out in the NFL the last, so many. He's better than Kyler Murray, in my opinion. I think he's better than both Tua and Joe Burrow. He's definitely better than Baker Mayfield. So as far as quarterbacks go, I think he's the best quarterback to come out in the NFL in a while. If I had to pick, I would pick Trevor Lawrence as my franchise quarterback, even though I love Kyler Murray. No disrespect. And I do love Tua this year. I do think, There's no injuries to Trevor Lawrence. He's done it for years and years now at Clemson. So, hey, you never know. Real quick, before we end this thing.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have the Chargers' new logo.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now.
Okay, it's not that bad. Are you looking at the same one as me? This is the one right here. I don't know if you guys can see.
No, I'm not looking at that.
Okay, which one are you looking at? This seems like.
I must need to pull this up on my phone. Let's see here. One sec, people, because
it's not that bad.
The one that the logo that I am currently looking at is a replica. This shouldn't be allowed. This should be copyright. Is a replica of the LA Dodgers, except it's got like a bolt at the end of the L.
This one? Right here?
No. If you can see my screen.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I have seen that one. Yeah, that's pretty bad too. I'll tell you that right now.
That's just like they're trying to be the Dodgers. I mean, I don't know what either of these design teams are doing right now. I don't know. I don't see any.
The LA teams need to be sued by the city of LA for this.
I don't see creativity. The Chargers should just stick with what they have, as opposed to going with this LA look. If this is indeed it, this is just breaking news that I just found out. So, not 100% sure if that is the real deal or not. But very interesting logos from both LA teams. Yeah. Give us your thoughts. Let us know what you think. If you're a Chargers or a Rams fan, if you like it, if you don't like it, what you think about these teams' futures and specifically for the upcoming season. Let us know.
Yeah. By the time this will be posted, I'll post a poll on Twitter, whether you like the logos. So if you see,
I can already tell you, I'm gonna say no.
Yeah, exactly.
No.
I think the podcast itself will say no too. But okay, so if you just heard Jared's question right there and told you to go do it right now, it's out on Twitter because we're not recording this live, so you'll be able to see that. I'm going to do it right after we're done recording this. So go vote on that poll and also comment about the podcast overall because you would have already seen it. But yeah, so Jared, I have a feeling we're going to have to do a couple of these coming up more recently. I don't think this went bad though. I think it's I'm good with Skype for now on the.
We made the best of our circumstances, my man.
Yes, we did. So this has been an interesting version of the Cover 2 podcast. Don't know what we're going to talk about next week. Hopefully Jadeveon Clowney gets signed. Hopefully we have an update of when sports might be happening soon. But yeah, we will have another podcast next week. We will do something for you guys to give you some entertainment in your quarantine time. So for Nick Nenad,
I'm Jared Smith.
This has been the Cover 2 podcast. Stay safe and stay indoors, guys.
See you guys. Stay safe.